drag me down. My life, you stood by me when no one else was ever behind me. All these lights, they can't blind me. With your love, nobody can drag me down.
I'd like to call up onto the stage Raghib Siddique to give us a kickstart on HSC and scaling.
How you guys doing? Good? All right, so I've been given the incredibly confusing task of trying to sort through probably one of the most controversial, probably one of the most confusing elements of the HSC, which is the topic of scaling, the topic of alignments, the topic of how all the internal marks sort of work together. And you've got a lot of people on all sides, right? So you've got some people that'll tell you, look, scaling doesn't matter that much, don't worry about scaling, just do anything and it's all okay, kumbaya, we can all just dance together, right? And you've got others on the other side, which I'm sure many of you are familiar with. I know I was, when my mum she walked to me in year 10 and she's like, Raghib, don't you know about Tanvir? He got 99.90. I didn't say zero, right? And she'd go through the, the different subjects that he did, and apparently they scale really well. And so I had this idea that, if I did those subjects, then I'll do fantastic, right? And that's the same story applies for some of my friends, right? He impersonated his parents, even funnier. He's like, "Hey, Tom, come here. You have to do the 4-unit math. You have to do the physics, the chemistry, the economic, and the English." All right, and that sort of idea, the famous Asian 5, right? For maths, eco, physics, chemistry, advanced English, that kind of stereotype about what scales well, what doesn't scale well. That I'm sure all of that is in your head. Now, what's my job? My job's really simple. Simple in essence, but kind of complicated. And I hope you guys will stay with me because it is a little bit of a complicated sort of numbers game that we're going to have to do. But the job that I have is relatively straightforward. The job is to take you guys from every mark that you'll ever get from your assessment task 1 all the way through your trials and explain how that works, right? How that's translated from your raw to your align mark, from your align mark to your HSC mark, from your HSC mark to an ATAR. So that's what we're going to go through. Now, to sort of explain this, I've got 4 pictures up here, and they all have something in common. The first is a picture from the Operation Desert Storm in 1991. The second is the picture of Arnold Schwarzenegger. You guys all know him. You know who that guy is, right? Yep, arguably one of the, arguably the second best footballer in the world. And then we have Japanese, right? The language of Japanese. Now, these 4 things have something in common. What they have in common is that for each of these things to occur well, learning a language, an operation in tactical warfare, weightlifting, and elite sport. For these 4 things to come together, 3 things need to be there. You have to have supremacy in resource. You have to have the best resources. That's the first thing. Number 2, you have to have what I like to call a solid work ethic, right? Nothing's going to work out unless you have a solid work ethic. And the third thing that I think ties it all together is the tactical superiority. So the good resources is what you have, the solid work ethic is how much you work with it, and the tactical superiority is knowing the name of the game, how the game is played, what are the rules, and obviously you're not going to be able to succeed too well if you don't know the names of the game. Now, studying is exactly like that. You need to have all three. They work together in harmony. You need to have the tactical element. You have to have good resources. If you're doing the wrong questions and you're doing 20 hours of it, right, it's not going to help you too well. So you need to have the good resources. You have to know the name of the game. Now, the tactical superiority that I'm talking about is things like knowing how scaling works, because that can actually help you win you that final edge. But that's all I'm talking about tonight, guys. I'm actually only talking about that final edge, because the bulk of your HSC is not going to come out of knowing what scaling is. That's the reality. I could talk here all day about statistics and deviations, but the bulk of your HSC is not going to come out of that. It's going to come out of the raw number of hours that you put in. How much of a work ethic you have. And what I'm doing is like the cream at the top of a really nice cake. If it's not the greatest cake, it doesn't matter how good the cream is. Now, so here's what I'm going to do. Because scaling, a lot of the time it's used as a bit of an excuse, right? So for example, if you're doing a subject that doesn't scale really well, or you think doesn't scale really well, you'll be like, oh, why bother studying? It doesn't scale. And on the other hand, you might do a subject that scales really well, and what do you say? You'll be like, oh, this subject scales really well, I'm not going to study. Either way, the result is you're not going to study, right? And that's really, the use of scaling as an excuse is something that you guys are not allowed to do. That's an agreement that I need you guys all to make. Scaling can never be an excuse, ever. That's the rule. It's never an excuse. It's never an excuse to go soft. It's never an excuse to start despairing, right? With that in mind, I want to go through sort of the journey. So at the end of the HSC, so these are the three elements. At the end of the HSC, so what you're going to get right at the end, you'll get a table that looks like this. So we've got a generic name called Jenna. These are the internal marks. Do we have anyone? Jenna? No one? Okay, cool. Yeah, we do? All right. Okay. So Jenna got these internal marks for advanced English, drama, visual arts, economics, and music, 2 units. She got an exam mark of these, and she got a HSC mark of these. Now, I'm going to explain where this internal mark comes from. I'm going to explain where this exam mark comes from. Now, the HSC final mark is actually the easiest one to understand. It's just the average of those two, right? So the average of 96 and 94 is 95. You guys know the averages, right? Yes? Right, so the average of 97 and 96 is 97 because they round up, and so on and so forth. Now, this is Jenna. This is Kim. He does English Advanced, 4-unit maths, physics, and chem, and he gets roughly similar marks, right? And roughly similar marks for the exam. They both perform really well. And even though on the one end you've got a student who's doing what a lot of people would say not the best scaling subjects, and you've got the second student who's basically doing the standard and the most official, like the most officially Asian 5 units you can do, right? The 10 unit, this is it, right? And they both end up getting the exact same ATAR, right? They both end up performing extremely well. Jenna gets 99.70 and Kim gets 99.70. Now, where do these ATAR marks come from? Where do those marks come from? That's going to be sort of the topic that I'm going to be dealing with. Now, the way I sort of structured this presentation is to make it like a bit of a journey, right? So we're going to go through every stage of your HSC from now, all the way to your trials, and then to your HSC, and then to your final ATAR, right? So the first thing you guys are going to get is you're going to do a whole bunch of internal assessments, and for that you're going to get a rank. And then you'll get an exam on the final day, which a lot of the students, they're in the process of completing. We're going to talk about what's the role of the school. It doesn't matter if you go to Malik Fahad or Sydney Boys, does it really make a difference if you're in Birong Boys, all of that sort of thing. We're going to be talking about that a little bit. We're going to be talking about how the final HSC mark is calculated, and finally, I'm going to be topping it off with a discussion of scaling. So, internals, ranks, exam, HSC, ATAR. That's really the process that I'm going to be going through. All right. So, we're going to take a subject that a lot of students do, which is the 2-unit advanced course. Now, this is just an example of the kind of assessments that you'll get. So in the assessment 1 that you're going to be sitting in however many weeks that you're going to do it, The first assessment task is going to be worth about 15%. You'll come back next year in term 1 and you'll do a half yearly worth about 20%. You'll have an assessment task 3 in term 2, which is worth about 15%. In term 3, you'll see your trials. That's the way it's going to work. And this is just an example. Your school can differ. Some schools do 2 trials and so on and so forth. But this is just an example. So let's go through the journey. Your first assessment task comes in. You get 63% raw. You're devastated. You're like, could have studied, should have studied. You're still in year 11 party mode, whatever the hell that is. And that is your result. So what do? Your holidays come in, and this is a good scenario. Your holidays come in and you realize, no, I really got to knuckle down. And you knuckle down and you do your best, and the half yearly comes around, you get a pretty good increase. You got 84% raw. And then you go to assessment task 3, you get 91% raw. You're really happy because that's the first time you've hit a 91 in maths since year 4. And then you do your trials and you've worked your butt off and you get 94% raw. Okay, so let's do the maths. You got 63% in your first assessment task. It was worth 15%. So out of 15, that's about 9.45. You can trust me, I did the maths, all right? I'll teach for you in the maths. So for the half yearly, you got 84%. It's worth 20%. So out of 20, you get 16.8. Assessment task 1, 91%. It's worth 15. You get 16.35 out of 15. The trials, you got 94%. 50% is how much it's worth. You got 47 out of 50. You add all these up, you get 86.9%. So does that mean, let's go back to our first sort of table. Does that mean in this column over here for your internals, you're going to get 87? Because let's have a look. Your internal mark raw is 87%. So does that mean that your internal mark is 87? And the answer is no. Big fat no. Because it doesn't work like that. I'll tell you why it's a no. There's basically 2 factors as to why it's a no. The first factor is this. Is an 87% from Birong boys going to be the same as an 87% in James Roos? No. Their papers are different. It's a different field. There's different competition. Is an 87% raw in music going to be the same as an 87% raw in 4-unit maths? No. Different dynamics, different subjects. So what do they have to do? And the answer to that lies in the way the Board of Studies names it is they call it moderation, right? This is the process by which they make your internal assessment mark. So how do they do it? This is going to be an example of 4 students in a year. We're going to assume that only 4 students did 2-unit maths that year. So you got Amy, Kim, Bob, and Harry. And the internal marks were as follows. Amy got 88, Kim got 87, Bob got 84, and Harry got 53. So their rankings are as follows. Amy's first, Kim's second, Bob's third, and Harry's fourth. Now, what does that mean? It means that if you're Kim and you got 87, Amy got 88, you're only 1% off Amy. Does that make sense? Yeah. And if you're Bob and you got 84, how far are you from 88? Amy, you're 4%. Does that make sense? And if you're Harry, right? Harry's got a bit of a sad case. He's 35 points away from Amy, so he gets negative 35. The Board of Studies never looks at these marks. They will never see your raw internal marks. They're not interested. What the Board of Studies is going to look at is they're going to look at your rank and how far you are from the guy who came first. Right? So the Board of Studies has a look and they go, look, Amy came first. Well, how much is she behind the first person? She gets that precious dash. That is a dash you really want. That is a very special dash. That dash means that you actually get to keep your marks. Now I'm going to explain what that means but that dash is very special, very, very special. So Amy gets the rank first and gets a dash. Kim, he gets a rank of 2, and the amount that he's behind Amy is negative 1%, Bob is negative 4%, and Harry is negative 35%. And the Board of Studies is only interested in these values over here. So what do they do with these values? So come the HSC, they get a HSC mark, and the exam mark that they get on the day is as follows. So Amy sits the exam, Amy gets 90%. Kim sits the exam, he gets 88%. Now Bob, in between trials and HSC, Bob goes crazy, right? He goes absolutely insane, and he works his butt off, right? And he gets 92%. He actually beats Amy. He actually beats Amy in the final exam. All right, here's what's happening. This is the weird bit. Here's what the Board of Studies is going to do. Because how do they develop the internal marks given that this is all they have? So they have their rankings and how much you're behind the first person, and they have the final exam mark. Now remember, this exam mark is the exam mark that you get on the day. It's yours. You get to keep it. It's your exam mark, right? So how do they develop your internal mark? The Board of Studies has 3 general principles by which they make the internal marks. The first principle is this. If you ranked first in the year, you get to keep the mark of whoever got the highest exam mark. I'll say that again. If you rank first in the year for the HSC internally, you get to keep whatever is the highest HSC mark. That's the first principle. The second principle, whoever gets the lowest exam mark will get the exact same assessment mark. So whoever got the lowest exam mark and you ranked last, you'll get that assessment mark. And finally, the average of the exam marks will be the same as the average of the internal marks. So what do these 3 principles translate to in terms of marks? Well, who got the highest exam mark in the cohort? Bob got it. But who came first internally? Amy. So Amy, for the internal mark, gets Bob's exam mark. All right? So, I'm going to explain this again. What was the first principle? The first principle was the highest exam mark goes to the assessment mark of the person who came first. So Bob got the highest exam mark, and his exam mark becomes the first internal mark. So that goes from here to 92 to here. Okay, well, the next question is Kim was -1% away from Amy, yes? So guess what Kim gets for his internal marks? 91. And what does Bob get because he's -4% away from Amy? What does Bob get? He gets -4% from 92, which is 88. And Harry's -35% from 92, he gets 66. That is the way the internal marks work. Okay, so given that's the case, what does that mean? What does that mean? That means that Amy, she got an exam mark of 90. Because she came first in the year, she gets to keep the highest exam mark, which is 92, and her final HSC mark is 91. Kim got 88 in an exam, and because he's only -1% away from the guy who came first, which is Amy, he gets 91, which means the average of 88 and 91 is actually 90, rounded up. Bob got 92 in exam mark. Bob gets to keep his exam mark, but his internal assessment mark is -4%, so he gets 88. So his HSC mark is 90, and Harry's Harry, right? All right, so we're going to take a pause here. What are the lessons that we can learn from this alignment process, from this moderation process? The first thing is this. Sorry? Yes, we are assuming that all of these guys are in the same school, okay? So that's a very important assumption, right? This is within the school. Right? We're not comparing students from outside the school. That's the job of the UAC. That's not the job of the HSC. So what does that mean? It means that if everyone in the year is given throughout the year really hard papers, like really brutally hard papers, and everyone's getting 60s and 70s and 40s, and the guy who comes first gets like 79, right? If you get a year like that, guys, I'm telling you right now, be grateful. It's better. I'm telling you, it's actually better. It's better to have hard exams. Why? Because you're going to get all these internal raw marks, but the Board of Studies is never going to look at your internal raw marks. They don't care. They couldn't care less about what you get internally raw. What do they care about? They care about 2 things. Your rank and how far you are from the guy who came first, right? So if your whole year gets these marks and the top cohort, they're really close together, and in your exam mark, you guys all perform amazingly, your assessment mark is going to correspond to your year's exam mark, right? So your internal raw marks, it doesn't matter how hard your exams are internally, right? It doesn't matter, because it matters about how your year goes in their final exam, because that's going to determine the range of the final assessment marks that you guys are going to get. The converse of this is also true. If you guys get some ridiculous examiner who just keeps putting like 2 + 2 in the first question, and everyone gets like, you get like 20 people getting 100%, you get another 20 people getting like a 98%. Let me tell you a story. One of the saddest moments for me in my HSC, right, was when I did my half yearly for extension 1, and it was worth 84. I got 82.5. 82, I lost 1.5 marks. Yeah? So really like that's pretty good. That's not bad. Right? I ranked 17th. The exam was too easy. And I lost 1.5 marks doing some stupid mistake. Like I added, like I thought the 0 was like -1 or something. Some really, really stupid thing that you guys do, like in an exam. It happens. And for that, I was punished from going from 1st to 17th. An easy exam is a good student's worst nightmare, because it doesn't show where you are. It won't show. If you guys are really good students, I'm telling you, you want something brutal. You really want something that makes you work for it. And you'll feel this kind of sadistic pleasure when you see everyone get 60s. I'm serious. It's better for you, man. So, you don't want a scenario where the exams are all easy, right? And your year's like a flop. You don't want that scenario, because at the end of the day, you guys see your final exam mark, and your assessment mark is going to be your final exam mark. And you'll be thinking, yeah, I got 80s throughout the year, and your final exam mark, your final HSC mark comes out, you got 75. Well, most likely it's because your school's been giving you assessment tasks that are way too easy, and you should have been doing assessment tasks, practice papers from harder schools. All right. So those are the first two. Your hard papers aren't necessarily a bad thing. Why? Because the Board of Studies will never look at your raw exam marks. All right. So we're going to do a quick recap. The internal marks are added, and then you're ranked according to your school. The BOS test, the Board of Studies, only works with 2 values. They work with your rank, and they work with your internal, with your rank and deviation, so how far you are from the guy who came first. They don't care about your internal raw mark. The person who comes first in the school gets the internal mark of the highest exam mark in the grade, and everyone else follows as per how far they are away from the guy who came first. So, raw marks. So what's the role of raw marks in your internals? All they are really is they're a good indication of how you're going. That's it. They're just good. So if you're getting 60s, like really you should be pulling your socks up, unless the exam is like ridiculous, right? If you're getting the 70s and you see yourself improving, that's all it's good for, to see where you are throughout the year, and for you to make like little markers of how you're going. And rankings matter, 100% rankings matter. But like if your top 30 are all getting like close to 100%, it doesn't matter. Your ranking's not, like being 15th in a year where the top 30 are all like 2 marks apart, it actually won't make a difference. It actually won't make, so the idea is this. You have to aim to stay in the league of the top students. Now, every school has a different number of students that are in the top league. Some schools, the top league is about 60 students. Some schools, it's just 3 students. You have to be in the top league, whatever the league is. So every year, you'll find some people, your school will get, on average, the same number of, like for example, 90 plus ATARs, approximately from year to year. Schools don't change too much. They don't change that radically. So if you're you're at a school where last year 20 people got above 90 ATAR, and you want to aim for a 90 ATAR, guess what you have to aim for? Top 20. It makes sense. It does, right? If you're in Sydney boys and about 40 people get 99 plus, and your aim is to get 99, well, your aim is to stay in the top 40. That's it, right? So you have to aim to stay in the league of the top students. And there's no difference in process between a top performing school and a normal school. There's actually no difference anymore. Why? Because if you're first or you're in the top league of students, what difference does it make? It doesn't make a difference. You'll get to keep whatever exam mark you get. If you're first, you get to keep your exam mark. What are you worried about? Right? So the only difference between a good school, so to speak, and a not so good school is actually the competition. Being in a quote unquote good school, the thing that pushes you is that the cohort around you is all working really hard. When you're in a school that's not as switched on, it means that you have to take the motivation into your own hands. You're not going to have students in the playground talking about integration, right? Right? Not in normal schools. We did a Sydney Boys because we're really sad like that, right? But in a normal school, you have to find the motivation from yourself. It doesn't mean you're disadvantaged. It means that you're actually in more control. That's what it means. So you have to aim to stay in the top league of the students. Now, this is a really, really important point. Very important. This work as a grade. If you as a grade work together, right? And you lift your whole year internally for your own school, you lift the grade up, you actually win. You as an individual will win if you help the grade move up. 100%. So in Sydney Boys, for example, after the trials were over, everyone shared everyone else's resources. Because it was in our interest to make sure that the guy who's sitting next to me got a band 6 as well. Why? Because my internal exam, my internal marks is going to depend on how this guy performs externally. So if you have like 3 or 4 students who are lagging behind, right, pushing them up from a 50 to a 70 may actually make more of a difference than pushing your own mark up from 90 to 91. Helping the guys who are at the bottom can make more of a difference than the marginal difference from your own self up top. Right? So you want to work as a grade together. And the last point is that if you're consistent throughout the year, it will pay. Right? Consistency pays a lot because the internal assessment, at the end of the day, it makes up half of your HSC. All right, so what have we got so far? We've got your internal marks, how they turn into a rank, and then finally, how they turn into an internal assessment mark. So we figured out how these numbers come into being, but we haven't spoken about how these numbers come, right? Does 90 exam mark mean that Amy got 90% raw? No, it doesn't work like that. So now we have to talk about the next step, which is alignment. Alignment is how they turn the raw exam mark that you see on the day of the HSC. So the students that are sitting their exam, they're sitting an exam, and the raw mark that they get, how do they translate that raw mark into the final exam mark, right? Is it scaled up? Is it scaled? How does that work? That's what we're going to be looking at today, because the HSC, and this is a weird diagram, but I think it is the most important diagram if you want to understand how scaling and the entire HSC works. You get a raw mark, you get a raw on the day exam mark, and that is aligned to get an exam mark that you see. That exam mark is put together with your internal to give you a HSC mark. The HSC mark is then scaled to give you an ATAR. That's the process, right? So if you want 10 seconds to write that down, that's fine, right? So raw mark on the day turns into an exam mark that you see, is averaged with the internal mark to give you a HSC, which scales to give you your final ATAR. That is the way the HSC works. So let's talk about this first process over here, which is alignment. Now, how does alignment work? Now, here's a heads up. All right, before you read the above, I'm telling you right now, alignment is the part of the HSC that's very hazy. They don't release statistics on this year by year. They don't, right? It's not public information. They don't hand the statistics out. All they do is they tell you the process. So all I'm going to do is explain to you guys the process. There's no fixed magical number that if you get this exam mark raw, you're guaranteed a band 6. There's no magical number. It changes every year. So here's what the border study says. The way alignment works is that a group of highly experienced markers, known as judges, decides how a student at the lower borderline of each performance band would respond at each examination item, and then determines what raw marks, right, such a response would achieve. These raw marks are then added together for each borderline, producing a recommended set of total cutoff marks. Now, to explain how this works, I'm going to give you guys 2 stories. Okay? The first story is the story in my own year, not my year, the year above. And I'm going to explain what happened with their English assessments. Now, before 2009, Sydney boys on average got about anywhere between about 50 to 60 band 6s in English, right? So 50 or 60 students got 90% and above, not 90 HC mark and above. In 2010, which is the year above me, the number of band 6s went from being 50 to 60 to about 92, which is a dramatic increase. We've literally been having 50 or 60 band 6s for like 3 decades, right? And for that jump to happen, it was a big deal. It was like, whoa, are these guys freaks? And obviously the guys above were like, yeah, we're the best year in the world, right? And they, you know, they really took that to something to brag about. But it turns out what happened was in that year, the guys who were doing the exam alignment process actually said that we are going to reduce the standard required to get a band 6. Yeah? So they reduced the standard to get a band 6. And if you look at the statistics, right, the statistics, what are the statistics saying? In 2009, across the entire state, 9% of the year got band 6s. 9%. In 2010, 15% of the year got band 6s. So literally, it was like a 50% increase. Well, if you look at the numbers in Sydney boys, we went from 60 band 6s to 90. That's a 50% increase. So the year wasn't special. What happened was literally the standards were decreased, right? And more people got band 6s. In other words, the judges, remember the judges I was talking about? The judges made the decision that we are going to reduce the standard, and in doing so, the numbers of band 6s shot up. Now, why did they increase it? God knows, politics, I don't know, right? I stay out of that. That question, I have no idea, right? How they fix the exact number, they'll tell you. It comes from a performance band descriptions, respondents from a stands package, statistical feedback, responses of current year, student consistent with the marks cutoff. So like a whole bunch of factors, and they pretty much pull it out, right? Exactly how that happens, we can never be sure. And the other story, you know, I'll actually skip that story, don't worry about that. So, the raw mark to the exam mark. There are some statistics about how this happens. Now, I need to give a warning about these statistics. These statistics are dependent on like some years, right? They're not published by the Board of Studies. These are statistics that some students decide to give out. So we've only got a sample of about 20 statistics. And these is a word of caution because the information that I'm about to give you is potentially really dangerous, right? It's potentially really dangerous. And if you don't understand exactly how to use this information, it's going to be to your detriment. Please note, the following are estimates deduced from the marks above and are approximations. The actual cutoffs vary from year to year as the examination varies in difficulty. The numbers I'm about to give you are raw marks of the exam to the HSC exam marks, right? How they go from raw to exam. And it changes every year. I'm telling you right now, the 2006 4-unit paper, the 2006 4-unit paper is nothing like 2015. 2015, ask any student that did 4-unit paper this year, they'll tell you it was a joke. It was a joke. It was like, it was a walk through the park. Relative to all the other years before it, it was a walk in the park. So guess what's going to happen? A raw mark of maybe 70% in 2006, probably this year, it'll probably be about 80% raw. Why? Because it was a harder exam before, and it was an easier exam now. So the alignment process is contingent on how difficult the exam is. So don't think that just because you're going to get a number that I'm going to show you, that you're going to get a band 6 for sure. It doesn't work like that. But these are the numbers, right? For English Advanced, if you want to get a band 6, it's about 76% raw. That's an average of 16.5 out of 20, right? If you're getting 16s and 17s in all your essays out of 20, approximately you should get a band 6, right? Approximately. Now that's not a guarantee because every year the exams change, the questions change, right? In my year, what they did was they actually gave a quote, and you had to use the quote in your essay. And that freaked everyone out. So guess what's going to happen? That raw mark is going to decrease. Why? Because it was a harder exam, right? When you look at the statistics, chemistry 71, physics 76, mathematics 81, extension 1, 3-unit maths 68, maths extension 2, 63% raw, scales to a band 6. I really need to explain these two, because this is what gives 3 and 4-unit maths its reputation. It scales really well, yeah? That's the reputation. The reputation that gets from 3 and 4-unit maths is that it scales really well. These are the numbers that explain it. Why is it that a 68% in extension 1 scales to a band 6 and a 63% in extension 2 scales to a band 6? Let me give you the answer. The answer is this. Show that for all positive integers n, x, big bracket, small bracket, 1 plus x to the n minus 1, plus 1 plus x to the n minus 2, plus dot dot dot, plus 1 plus x squared plus 1 plus x plus 1, close big bracket, is equal to 1 plus x to the n minus 1. And that's 1 mark! It's 1 mark, man! 1 mark out of 84. So of course 68% is going to scale to a band 6. When you get questions this difficult, yeah, of course that's going to happen. Hence show that thing. 1 mark. Show this. 1 mark. Oh yes, 3 marker. Yeah, no one thinks, oh yes, 3 marker. Everyone's thinking, oh no, 3 marker. Right? 4-unit. This is extension 1, 4-unit. Show that pi could be written in the form P over Q, where P over Q are positive integers. Define the family. What the hell's a family? I feel nothing. This isn't like family, right? Integrals I of n is equal to 0 from 0 to whatever is, Mum, please, right? I want to go home, right? And what's that? What? 3 marks? 3 marks for like that thing? And 1 mark for this? Guys, like I said, scaling, alignment, it's not a way to cheat the HSC. There's no cheat. There's no shortcuts. There's none of that. 3 and 4-unit maths, the reason they scale is because they're difficult subjects. And they scale according to how hard it is to get the marks. It's not a shortcut. And the guys who aren't doing it, you're not missing out. You think it's easy to get 68 in this thing? It's not, man. It's not. Scaling, the idea that scaling works as a shortcut or as an advantage or a disadvantage, it doesn't. There is no advantage. There's no disadvantages. It works to make the system fair. That's what it's really there for. So that is how alignment works. So let's have a look. So alignment, you get a raw mark on the day, and that is translated to an exam mark that you'll see. That exam mark will be averaged to give you a HSC mark, and the HSC marks will scale to give you your ATAR. Now, this scaling business, that's the easiest part. The scaling is done by the UAC, and I trust that you've all gone through like the Matrix and all of those other websites that do ATAR calculators. Yeah? You've seen them, you should see them. And this last bit is the HSC marks to the ATAR. It converts the HSC to an ATAR. Right? And this information is in the public domain. The UAC, which is the University Admissions Center, publishes that freely. They're called Table A1, A2, A3, all the way up to A9. And this information is in the public domain. It's very easy, very easily accessible. And there's some tables here. This is like kind of a diagram that shows you how exactly the University Admissions Center converts the HSC mark for each subject to an ATAR. So they get the HSC mark. They give you an aggregate out of 50 for each subject. That aggregate is taken for your top best 10 units, and then your total is compared to give you an ATAR, right? So, for example, these are the sort of marks that you get. So standard English, if you got a HSC mark of 97 in standard English, that's a scaled mark of about 48 out of 50, right? For advanced English, if you got 99 HSC, that's like 50 out of 50, right? and the table goes on, and if you want, you can just, this is all available in the public domain. This is a good, this is the way aggregates work. So the aggregates that you get over here are added up, and if you've got 10 units and each aggregate is out of 50, how much is the total? It's 500. Does that make sense? Does that make sense? Yes. So you get a final scaled mark out of 500, and if you want a 99.95 out of 500, if you're doing it in 2013, out of 500, you need 477.9, right? If you want a 99.50 out of 500, you need 455.0. If you want a 90, you need 371.30. And all of these, you don't have to do much of the work yourselves. The ATAR calculators online, they do a pretty good job of it. These are some tables, like sort of some diagrams to show you how it works. So the green line is standard English and the way standard English scales. The red line is advanced English. It scales a little bit higher than standard, but towards the end, standard and advanced scale about the same. 4-unit English is the most retarded. It like scales up, and then like it doesn't scale too well in the top, but like it evens up at the top anyway. And extension 1 just like it dances up there, right? That's English. For general maths, the tendency for maths, it's really like it's really quite marked. So general maths is the green line, 2-unit maths is the red line, just a little bit above it, and extension 1 goes from here to there. So it starts about 35, and extension 2 maths starts at about 42 and goes to 50. Now, 42, think about it. They're only releasing statistics from 42 onwards. What does that mean? It means that, let's go to 42. It means that most 4-unit students are getting about 95 plus ATARs. That's the statistics, right? That doesn't mean, and it should be noted, just because you're doing 4-unit, that doesn't mean you get a good ATAR. Just because you're not doing 4-unit, it doesn't mean you're not going to get a good ATAR. The system doesn't work like that. But it's just a reality that 4-unit maths scales relatively, it's okay. Because, and you guys had a look at it, the exams are ridiculous, right? Not in 2015 though. Bio, PDHPE, so these are the sciences. Physics and chemistry are the top 2, they scale relatively well. And bio and PDHPE, it scales relatively good in the top actually. And you can go through each of these, but I want you guys to notice a particular trend, right? So let's go back to English. In the 70s to 80s, there's a huge difference in the way they scale. Did you notice? Yeah, there's a huge difference. But about 90 onwards, what happens? They like collapse. Do you see that? Right? That happens for English. For maths, it happens as well. They collapse towards the top. For the sciences, it happens as well. They start off relatively apart, and towards the top, they converge towards the end. For the social sciences, it does the same thing. And so the essential difference, if I had to summarize the difference between a high scaling subject and a low scaling subject, or low scaling, the essential difference is this. A high scaling subject is just it scales consistently. But what we call quote unquote low scaling subject means that if you're getting in the 70s and 80s, yeah, like potentially it's not as good of a scalar as physics and chem. But if you're getting in the 90s, it actually doesn't make a difference. It actually, like really, towards the top end, scaling does not make too much of a difference when you're getting 90 plus in your subjects, right? You get 95 in drama, you get 95 in extension on maths, I'm telling you, they scale about the same, right? And I'm telling you right now, drama sounds a lot more fun, right? So, recap. Let's go through this. So your internal mark becomes an internal rank. They check it with the deviation and how fast you are from the guy who came first, and they combine that with the grade performance to give you an internal assessment mark. The raw HSC exam mark plus the boss test alignment gives you your exam mark. The average of your internal assessment mark and your exam mark gives you a HSC mark. And your HSC mark is scaled to give you an aggregate, and the aggregate is ranked to give you an ATAR. And that is the way the HSC ATAR system works. Right? Well, not yet, just not finished just yet. So some final remarks. I'm almost finished, so I'm sorry if it's a bit numbers heavy. Just bear with me for a few more minutes, but I just want to draw out some of the morals of the story. It's not just rankings, right? So the first point, it's not just about rankings, right? If you're first in the grade and you're in a school that's not the greatest, first in the grade may not mean too much. So you need to be careful. You need to compare yourself across the whole year. Across the whole year, across all of New South Wales. How are you going to do that? Don't just do past assessment tasks from your own school. Do other schools. See what they're doing, right? And just because you're 20th in a school that is competitive, right? That's not the end of the world, because if you're in the top league, you have to stay in the top league, because it's not just about rank, it's about how far you are from the guy who came first. Conventional subjects and high scaling subjects behave approximately the same way up top. So really, think about it like this. Does this talk change the way you should approach your HSC? No, because you should be aiming for the top anyway. There's no difference. Your aim should have always been a 90, right? But now you know that if you're stuck, for example, doing modern history, right, you should have more of an incentive to get a band 6. Because getting a band 6 in modern history is really not that different to getting a band 6 in 4 unit maths, really. Scaling-wise, they're both approximately 99 plus ATARs, right? Scaling happens largely to neutralize bias, not to create shortcuts. There are no shortcuts to the HSC, right? The reason why scaling works is to make sure that the system is fair. I recommend that you cover all weaknesses. Don't think that, oh, I'm not that good at physics, I'm not going to study physics, because it's going to count. Your average marks are going to be weighted and it's going to create your ATAR. You do not want any weak subjects. And help each other out in the year. So if you guys work as a unit and it's a tough cohort and you guys work as a pack, you do exams together, you study together, and you work as a pack like a pack of wolves, and you work like a pack of wolves, you guys will be okay, right? And that's it. All right. Hope that was beneficial.